So with respect to safety, how did TVA safety performance compare to those that we benchmark against?
On a statistical basis, we benchmarked pretty well. For the last several years, we have been the top decile, and in some years, the leading performer in the industry. For most of this year, we were top decile, but we lapsed into the top quartile. But the way to look at this, I don't think, is statistically where you compare to others so much as it is, can you get to 0 accidents? So on a pure comparison, we look pretty good by our own standards. We fell hard this year and we need to improve.
As a follow-up, are there lessons we can incorporate to improve our safety performance?
We spent a lot of time thinking and talking about this, and I think we made an error in thinking that we had a process, program, and procedure problem instead of a people problem. The people being mostly those of us in charge who haven't quite won the hearts and minds of all the employees. And I really think we need to focus on connecting directly with every employee to make sure that we care about their personal well-being and their safety. And that's what we're about doing at the moment.
President Bill Johnson expresses his concerns over safety in the TVA.
I guess you'd expect me to ask a financial question. The financial and operational, it appears to me that this might be the best year in TVA's history financially. In fact, I think it is. But I guess it's sort of what you can do for me next, both operationally and financially.
I was asked the other day whether we had achieved stability in our headcount, in our O&M budget, in our performance. And Pete, my answer was I don't look for stability, I look for better results every year. So can we continue the track we're on? There's only one thing that will keep us from doing that, and that is us. So do we have the willpower, the discipline, the urge to continue to improve? I think we do. That's certainly the plan. Whether we can produce another $1 billion net income year in 2016, we'll have to see, Pete, but we're going to work hard at it.
Sir.
Are there any other questions? Bill, you and your team have done a remarkable job. Most of us have joined the board about the same, or at least some of us joined the board about the same time you came here. Some may not be aware. It's only been 2 years and 10.5 months, and it's been a remarkable turnaround in TVA, and your team have done things that I don't think any of us ever expected. So thank you for the results that we're getting and continue to improve TVA for all the citizens of the Valley. Our next item on the report is Finance, Rates, and Portfolio Committee. Chairman Pete Mahurin will present this report. Pete?
That was Joe. Chairman of the board, Joe Rich.
October 28th and reviewed the financial performance. We have 2 items for the board's consideration. Before we get to those, I would like to ask Chief Financial Officer John Thomas to provide the figures on financial performance from last year. We have a very positive message here.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll begin with a few of the highlights. So this year TVA did have net income of $1.1 billion, and that will be the highest net income in TVA's history. And so that's roughly $517 million more than budget. And I'll go through some of the details of this in just a minute. Driven heavily by base revenue, somewhat driven by weather. I'll talk a bit about weather because it's such a big factor for us in a bit more detail in a minute as well. The operations and maintenance expenditures, we've been talking about the efficiency efforts that we've been under for the last 3 years, and we exceeded that $500 million goal. And then lastly, we use these favorable results to actually accelerate the pay down of our debt, and that certainly shows up in lower interest expense. To talk just for a minute about weather, this chart shows you on the left side the number of heating degree days. So this is an indication of how cold the winters were. So if you look, we budget for what we call normal weather. That would be just over 3,000 heating degree days. You can see that 2015 was a very cold winter. It wasn't quite as cold as 2014, which is one of the coldest winters on record, but it still was a very cold winter overall. As Bill mentioned, the peak days that were set last February. If you move to the right side, this gives you an indication of what the summer looked like, so the number of cooling degree days. And so it was a relatively hot summer as well. hotter than we would had in 2014. And so overall, these weather results impacted our base revenue. So as I move into a look at non-weather results, and that's what this chart shows. It's a little bit hard to follow, but if you think of the light gray area, when we extract the impact of what weather caused, you can see that our load was essentially flat year over year. So we've been budgeting and planning for about a 1% growth here in the valley, and we had seen that over the last several years, but this year suddenly we're seeing that that's relatively flat. There's a couple of industries that have been hard hit in the area that contribute to this a bit, the steel industry in particular. But if you look beyond that, we're seeing that the increased penetration of efficiency efforts is really driving down demand as well. And so when we meet with you this winter to talk about our overall long-range plan, we'll have a better look at what these trends will look like and what they mean going forward. Overall, a relatively flat year in terms of underlying demand. So to focus on the income statement for a minute, you can see we had operating revenue of just over $11 billion. Fuel and purchase power was $158 million favorable. As I've talked in past quarters, this was driven by really two factors. One, lower natural gas prices. We've added over the last 5 years quite a bit of natural gas generation to our portfolio, and we're able to take advantage of that. As well, we had improved operational performance of our nuclear fleet and some of our larger coal units, and you see that show up directly in fuel and purchase power expense. In terms of the O&M, if you focus on the business unit O&M, which is really kind of the controllable efficiency efforts, you can see that we were $118 million favorable to the $500 million reduction that would have been included in the budget. So over $600 million of O&M efficiencies that we've achieved. Depreciation is slightly higher. That's predominantly driven by the accelerated depreciation associated with Widows Creek and a decision to idle that plant earlier than what we had planned. Lastly, you can see the $69 million worth of favorability in interest expense. So overall, $1.1 billion of net income. In terms of operating cash flow, as you would expect with that strong performance, we had $3.3 billion worth of operating cash flow, which was just over $800 million favorable to what we had planned. That certainly was very helpful when you consider TVA's largest period of investment that we've had in our history was last year at almost $3.6 billion. So quite a bit of construction work that was underway with the completion of Watts Bar 2, the work we're doing at Gallatin in terms of the clean air equipment, and then at Paradise and Allen, where we're in construction under the natural gas plants. And so overall then, only $70 million worth of financing during the year. We used the strong operating cash flow to fund this investment. And so if you look at our total debt and financing obligations at $26.1 billion, or over $1.2 billion less than what we had planned. And our overall statutory debt level now is below $24 billion. So in summary, we did see flat electricity sales, but overall higher revenue driven somewhat by the weather. Lower fuel cost. Our effective rate for our customers actually went down year over year. And so if you think about that, a year ago, you as a board approved a 1.5% base rate increase, and the overall effective rate went down slightly year over year. So that's where you see the impact of these fuel efficiencies and the O&M efficiencies directly impacting the bottom line and what our customers pay. So that's the end of my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, these are the TVA PDF slides of the presentation from the CEO, the CFO, and various other individuals. They were not shown during their individual presentations, but this is on economic development. FY 2015 results, 76,200 jobs created and are retained at a $7.8 billion capital investment. Financial performance of the TVA. Net income, $1.1 billion. Base revenues, $343 million above budget. Operating maintenance expenses, $151 million favorable to budget. Interest expense, $69 million favorable to budget. FY 2015 income statement. The debt is not listed on here. That will be the next slide. Ending debt and financial obligation is $26,120,000,000. The statutory debt is $23,878,000,000. As you can see, that is an increase of about a little less than $100 million over last year's debt. The debt is increasing.